Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa DiDonato.
And I'm Marion Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn Nursing podcast supported by the Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm.
We've come a long way, but man, there's a lot of work to do. And boy, do we have to remain vigilant in making the case for why nursing research and nursing innovation matters.
On this episode of Amplify Nursing, host Marion Leary sits down with longtime collaborator Ahrin Mishan, Executive Director of the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation, for a thoughtful conversation about the past, present, and future of nursing innovation. Ahrin shares the story behind the foundation's origins, rooted in the vision of Rita Hillman, and how a personal experience with nursing care led to a lasting commitment to support nurses as leaders and changemakers. Together, they discuss why nurses are uniquely positioned to identify gaps in care, design new solutions, and drive systemic change, especially for marginalized communities, and why investing in nurse innovators is essential for the future of healthcare.
Hello, Ahrin. I am so excited to finally have you on the Amplify Nursing podcast.
Marion, I am so excited as well. It's been a long time coming.
It really has. And we've been working together now, I don't know, for 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah, I think it's close to 7 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in my role at Penn Nursing for 7 years, so that seems about right. And I am really excited to have anyone who doesn't know about you and the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation learn about your dedication and passion to supporting nurses, and especially nurses in the innovation and leadership space.
Absolutely. I think we've long felt that nursing innovation is one of the great untapped resources in healthcare. And when I took over stewardship of the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation in 2011, at that time, we were a foundation focused on New York City. We were focused on clinical bedside nursing and trying to address kind of a sense that there was a shortage of highly qualified nurses in New York City. When the program started in 1990, that was very much the case. But when I took over stewardship in 2011, that was no longer an issue. And so when I became executive director, I was interested in shifting the focus and looking at the ways that nurse innovators and nurse change makers had the capacity for systemic change or creating systemic change and this capacity for widespread impact. And so we really rebuilt the programs at the foundation. So today we have programs that encompass the full arc of development for nursing-driven innovations. We have programs that support work at the very nascent stage. We have programs that support work that has a promising evidence base but is not quite at a level where they're ready for national scale. And at the other end of the spectrum, we support work that is kind of best in class and in a position to scale on a national and sometimes international level. Our grantees are spread across the country, and some of the innovations that we've supported, I think, represent some of the real standard bearers for the power of nursing innovation. So I'm super proud of the work that all of us at the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation do, and particularly grateful for what I get to do every day and the people that I come in contact with. I think that's the best part of it all is that I get to call hundreds of nurse innovators, not only grantees, but friends. And I am so much smarter and more interesting as a result of getting to know what they do and what drives them.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I am so much smarter and interesting because of all of them as well. And I want to talk more about the programs and some of those folks in a little bit, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to tell us a little bit about who Rita and Alex Hillman were and why they were committed to supporting nursing.
It's a great question. Well, first I should say that they're my grandparents. And so, um,
Did I know that?
no, I'm not sure.
I
You know,
don't
it's
know
an
if I knew
interesting,
that.
it's a very long story. They're my grandparents, and I fell into this position of taking over stewardship of the foundation kind of unwillingly. The foundation, after my grandmother passed, was going to shut down. And I had a successful career in another field and just didn't think that it made sense for me to step into this position. But I was approached a number of times by the board and saw an opportunity to do something really meaningful in the world. I knew that I had to do a lot of homework and then I needed to get up to speed, but it was something that I couldn't pass up. But going back to Rita and Alex Hillman. So Alex Hillman, my grandfather, was a publisher, and he set up the foundation in sort of the ways that are very traditional, right? It's an extension of family interests. And to make a long story short, he he passed away in the late 60s. And my grandmother, I think, found a lot of meaning and purpose in using the foundation to try to advance the greater good. And for the first, I'd say, 20 years of the foundation's existence, there was a focus on the arts. And in the late 80s, my grandmother was ill, was in a hospital, and this happens to so many people and so many people who end up funding nursing at some point. She had an experience in the hospital where it was so clear to her that the key to healthcare, to the provision of trustworthy care, humane care, compassionate care, it all was about the nurses. And at that time in the late 80s, there was an acute nursing shortage across the country. And so when she got out of the hospital, she went home, and there was some remarkable art in her home because my grandfather and grandmother had collected art. And she sold in 1989 a very famous Picasso. It was a mother and child, and she used the proceeds from that to create a number of programs, including the program at Penn that is now the Hillman Scholars Program in Nursing Innovation, but at that time was just the Hillman Scholars Program. So that was kind of the genesis of this. And I think that it just speaks to, I think for so many people, nursing gets overlooked. But the moment that you have a firsthand experience with the power of nursing in a variety of settings, there's a kind of an epiphany that a lot of people have, and that certainly happened for my grandmother. And she was an amazing thinker, and she sought out really sharp minds. So an innovator that we both know and that your listeners, I imagine many of them know, is Mary Naylor, who really created the transitional care model. And Mary Naylor was, I think, the first program director for the Hillman Scholars Program in 1990. So that's an interesting piece of trivia.
I mean, I find all of this story fascinating. And to your point, it really does highlight how, like you said, once you have this interaction in healthcare with a nurse, that really does change everything and really shows individuals, the public, like what nurses
Mhm.
actually do and the value of nurses in healthcare. And love, which it shouldn't have to be said, but it constantly has to be repeated.
It does. There was a great something my grandmother used to always say, and it's kind of, she was really ahead of her time. To put this in context, so my grandmother was somebody who regularly spent time with people ranging from heads of state to Nobel Prize winners. And I guess where I'm going with this is she felt very comfortable and was part of this kind of these amazing thought leaders and critical thinkers. And what she would repeat to them over and over was that the most impressive people that she ever encountered were nurses with PhDs. And when she was saying that in the early 90s, I think that that was the kind of thing where people just didn't quite even know what that meant. A nurse with a PhD, what is that? And so it's sort of amazing to think that here we are on your podcast that is sort of embracing this world of nursing innovation and nurses as change makers and designers of systemic change and all of that. I think it's just, we've come a long way, but it's and something that you and I talk about is we've come a long way, but man, there's a lot of work to do. And boy, do we have to remain vigilant in making the case for why nursing research and nursing innovation matters.
Yeah, and it's a great point. And boy, I could dedicate this whole podcast, I think, talking about your grandmother because she sounds fascinating and I'd love to learn more. But to your point, like, I wonder, like, you're running this esteemed program now, Foundation. Why do you think it constantly has to be repeated and we have to show the value of nursing, research, and innovation? What do you hear when you're out talking to others outside of the very siloed world I think I live in the healthcare space and outside of it?
Well, I think that, it's in terms of a kind of general public notion of who nurses are and what they do, it's still rooted in what feels like a slightly antiquated image and notion of what a nurse is and does. And it's a kind of a tough one to distance ourselves from because it is wrapped up in that whole idea of nurses as the most trusted profession. And we never want to lose that, right? But but in some ways it diminishes the power of the critical thinking that nurses bring to innovation, the unique perspective on care and where there are gaps in care that need to address that only nurses can see, right? They work at this crucial nexus, at this intersection where payment systems and a behemoth medical system and the lives of average people kind of converge. And so they see things in a way that other health professionals can't. And that's really important. And I think at a time when I fear patients, particularly patients from marginalized groups and communities, are kind of further marginalized, I think nurses are really key to ensuring that the idea of equitable care isn't just a box that you tick, but that it is built into everything that is designed as we move forward in thinking about how we improve the healthcare system. So to me, nursing's voice is just critical, because I think without nurses, there is a critical perspective that's just missing from any conversation about how we create a better healthcare system and a healthier society.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned that originally the focus of the Hillman Foundation was more on the research aspect. When did it shift over to innovation, and why? And how do you see the work of research and innovation going hand in hand in what you're supporting?
Yeah, so when I took over stewardship, I wanted to, in some ways, shift our North Star so that I would say that today we're primarily concerned with addressing the healthcare needs of marginalized groups and communities, and that we use nursing as our primary tool for addressing those needs. So we're not a professional organization, I would say. I think that nursing is so deeply embedded in everything that we do, but we are not, we don't exist in order to advance the nursing profession or to advance nursing science. So I think that we invest in innovation and nursing innovation because we're interested in broad-based systemic change and the potential for exponential impact. When we were supporting individual bedside nurses, we knew that those bedside nurses, had an impact on the lives of every patient that they spent time with and their families, et cetera. But the model of changing the world one clinical nurse at a time just felt like we weren't going to get anywhere. And so we wanted to invest in nurses who were designing new delivery models, new approaches to care, new systems innovations. And we felt that that's a more effective and strategic approach to creating a more equitable future.
You're one of the most thoughtful, critical thinkers that I know. And I'm curious where you see the profession going over the next few years, or where you think how it needs to potentially pivot to keep making critical impacts in the areas where nurses practice.
It's a great question. I think about this all the time and love talking to nurses like you and innovators like you about these kinds of questions. And in fact, Heather Young, who's a former dean at UC Davis and is the director of the Betty Irene Moore Fellows Program for Nurse Leaders and Innovators. She and I actually just co-wrote an article in Nursing Outlook called Charting the Course, the imperative for creative reimagining among nurse scientists in an era of unprecedented threat. And it was an opportunity for us to try to distill some of the things that we've been thinking about as leaders of organizations that have invested in nursing innovation for a very long time, and also an opportunity to distill what we've learned from talking to nurse innovators over the last nearly 15 years. And so just to break some things down, I guess, and thinking about like, what do we need to do, or what are some calls to action? I think that number one, this is a time where creativity is one way to navigate this moment of uncertainty. So we want to really lean into being flexible and creative. So I think that we can approach partnerships and coalitions in a more creative way. I think that some of the most interesting work that we support involves creative partnerships with kind of non-traditional organizations like faith-based organizations or small business alliances. And these represent scenarios where communities and not academic institutions end up supervising and leading research. And so to me, that disruption is a really interesting one. The idea of community-led research, that's I think really interesting and an area that where we need to do more work and that needs to have more support. I think that in terms of how we test prototype innovation and disseminate models, that we need to seek out, identify, and support alternatives to uh, things like traditional randomized control trials. And we have to embrace, I think, a sprint mindset alongside the marathon mindset of randomized control trials. We have to think about ways of accelerating testing and dissemination a little faster. And there are programs out there like Team Birth that was created at Ariadne Labs and is led by Amber Weisseth, where they've done amazing work in taking a program from pilot to dissemination at over 200 hospitals around the country in the span of just a few years. That's kind of amazing. So I think we need to look at those kinds of models for inspiration. I think that we have to think about new ways of communicating the importance of nursing research, right? I think it's 1 in 2 Americans now get their health data from social media. And if that's not crazy enough, increasingly people trust what they're finding on social media. So we really have to develop new communication strategies in this new media landscape where creators and influencers are winning the public trust. You know, going back to that notion of nurses being the perennial most trusted profession. I'm not so sure about that right now. And I think that we have to embrace the reality of what's going on in the present. And finally, I think that we can do more together than we can independently. So I think that this is a time to try to break through all of the divisions and fractures that we're all familiar with in the world of nursing, and to try to find common ground and community. So as you know, Marion, we just launched something called the Nursing Innovation Collective. And that grew out of these conversations with Heather Young about how we might transform a loosely connected group of nurse innovators and leaders into a more cohesive and powerful collective that might be capable of catalyzing change. So I think in these kinds of communities, they can serve as amplifiers of good ideas. They can be accelerants for innovation and multipliers of real world impact. I would also say that for the innovators out there listening, that I understand that being an innovator is a really lonely thing sometimes, particularly for those who are working in academic settings. And so these kinds of communities are places where you can tap into shared knowledge, forge new connections and partnerships, seek out peer mentors. It's a community and brain trust for not only doing really good work, but for reimagining and designing the future. And that last part, I think, is just critical right now, is we can't be stagnant, and we have to start thinking now about how we design for what the landscape will look like whenever the chaos of this present moment subsides.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is great. And, you know, a lot of the work that we have done together over the years has centered on the innovation methodologies of human-centered and equity-centered design. And I feel very strongly that it's not a methodology or approach that can be used or should be used just for solving healthcare problems, but to your point, for nurses to have that mindset to be able to advocate and navigate these uncertain times and to use that mindset and our nursing experience, knowledge, value to be those voices on social media, to be those trusted healthcare sources when other voices can sometimes seem louder. And it's why I'm always pushing for nurses to be on social media, to use their voice in, op-eds or with the media, because we have so much to offer and we have a skill set, again, a knowledge and a value that is really critical for the time we are in right now. And for the Hillman Foundation and the Moore Foundation to be supporting these types of communities and these types of programs and giving nurse innovators these spaces and voices to come together, I think is just so important, and I am thankful for it.
Well, I just want to give you a quick shout out because I think that you've been such a powerful ambassador. I think early on, I think your voice on social media has carried far. You just have a ton of influence and you've inspired a ton of people just in helping to make design thinking or human-centered design seem just like, of course, that's the sort of thing we should all know. And that in fact, many of us are already doing that sort of thing. And that you help to demystify something that seemed like it was, oh, I don't know, kind of maybe inaccessible. So the normalization of incorporating a design mindset into the work that nurses do is something that you've really helped to advance. And so, again, I love that increasingly we're creating this ecosystem where we're all working together. We're all sharing what we have with one another. And it wasn't like that necessarily, I don't know, just 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It was just starting to emerge. So I'm very, this is one area, and I can't say this about other areas of the world or my life, but this is one area where I feel full of hope. So all the more reason to celebrate that you and I are talking on this podcast. Yay!
Couldn't agree more, Ahrin. And thank you for all the work that you do and to the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation for the continued support of nursing and nursing innovation. And I want to just ask one final question. Where do you see the foundation going in the next 5 years?
Wow, in the next 5 years. So I think that the Nursing Innovation Collective that we launched this year, which again is among other things, an effort to create a community that can act as an amplifier of good ideas, as I said earlier. I think that will become an important part of what we do. So if I think about how we can cultivate work at a very nascent stage and help work that is promising move to that next stage of development, I think that the community will play a role in that and that there will be greater coordination between our grant programs and a community of innovators and change makers who are committed to getting good work done and making sure that we bring solutions to scale as rapidly as possible. The landscape is so uncertain at the moment that it's actually kind of tough to think about in 5 years, what are we going to do? And I'm, we have doubled down, for instance, on the number of grants that we give for emerging work because we know that that there are fewer grant making mechanisms available at this moment. So we want to do our best, although we're not a big foundation, we want to do our best to seed the field widely. But in 5 years, I guess we want to be ready to pivot when we need to pivot. And in the meantime, we're going to do what we can to support nurses who are thinking now in this moment of uncertainty about designing for the future. I think that that's the key thing is it's now is the time to begin the design process. It's not waiting for the fog to clear. And we want to support those efforts.
Well, Ahrin, thank you for continuing to sow the field. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you into the future and watching this incredible community of nurses grow because of the work that you and the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation do. So thank you.
Again, we see ourselves as partners alongside nurses and nurse innovators. We're doing our part to advance important and critical work. So thanks to you for being such a good friend and partner. And I hope we get to do this again.
Absolutely. Hello, Angela.
Hello, Marion. How are you?
I'm great. I had the best conversation with one of the people I love the most in this nursing philanthropy field, Ahrin Mishan, who I've worked with for, gosh, going on, I guess, 8 years now is what we determined when we were talking. He is just one of the most thoughtful, intentional, and insightful people that I get to work with. He's just really brings so much to the philanthropy world and to the world of nursing, leadership, and innovation. I've learned so much from him.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation, Marion. And I have to say, in listening to it, it reminded me of how important it is to have advocates outside of nursing who understand the importance of nursing. And I think it sounds to me like Ahrin and the organization he's working for is really like I can't I don't know that I've ever heard somebody outside of the profession being so supportive.
Right? He gets it on such a deep level, but he gets it on such a deep level because, again, he's so thoughtful about what he does, who he interacts with, how he engages and learns what the profession is and what we need. And he's a true partner and collaborator in a way that a lot of other organizations are not, just because of the way that they're set up. It's just the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation, based on what I learned, which I love learning new things about people I know. He's the grandson of the Rita and Alex Hillman, and his grandmother's story was fascinating. Like I said, I could have had the whole podcast just be about her, but like it feels like that's what laid the foundation for what he calls his stewardship as the person at the helm of this organization that his grandmother founded. The whole thing was just really inspiring, and it really shows that, you get out of something what you put in, and he's putting in, that foundation his grandmother laid.
Yeah, agreed. You can definitely tell that he brings to this passion that only comes with somebody who has a really strong sense of responsibility of what's the right thing to do, probably because of the history behind the organization.
Yeah, and again, boy, does he get how nursing is perceived out in the world, how we need to change that perception, and what nurses also need to do to control the narrative and use our voices and expertise. He is a great advocate for nurses and the profession in a time when we need great advocates.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marion Leary and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Follow us on Twitter at Penn Nursing. Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through.